So you're all very welcome. I'm delighted to have a full room here tonight for what is our 6th Valentia lecture. And I'd just start by saying a very special welcome to our two ambassadors, Ambassador Smythe from Canada and Ambassador Cronin from the United States. So we have North America well covered. And we're delighted to have you both here today. I know it's Nancy's second time and it's Claire's first time, but you're very welcome and looking forward to your contributions today. And so just to start, I always like to start with this quote from Morse. So Samuel Morse, you'll all remember from the Morse code days, and so the technology that was used for the transatlantic cable was Morse code. So essentially, it was his invention. He was an American painter turned inventor. But this lovely quote from him that said, when he was looking at what was possible, he said, if the presence of electricity was made visible, intelligence could be transmitted instantaneously by electricity. So that was his prediction. But it wasn't until things like the transatlantic cable was done, and again, we won't go into the story here in great detail. I'm sure it'll be referenced today, but it was a huge endeavor. It took many years. It took a huge investment. It involved some incredible characters, scientists, entrepreneurs, all sorts of people to make it happen. And finally, when it did happen, again, I'll just start with a second quote, which if I can find it here, was that it's a quote from the American Scientific Journal of 1870, and it said, "Now almost every considerable expanse of water will be traversed by these slender cords, binding continents, bringing the human race is one great family." So it was an incredible thing that happened, and it all happened here, that did transform the world and changed the time it took for the two continents to communicate from 2 weeks to just seconds. And as a kind of a point in case, actually, it was more relevant to one of our speakers today, when President Lincoln was shot in, I think it was, I'm going to say August 1965, it took 14 days before London found out. So that's what it was like before this transformation happened. So certainly our project, as I know, I think everybody at this stage probably heard the great news yesterday that the Transatlantic Cable Project, has been recognised by the Irish government as one of 3 projects that will be considered to be put forward by UNESCO over the next number of years. It's taken us a while to get here to this particular accomplishment, and I must really recognise particularly the community here. It's their project. It was the community that put this project forward, and I think that's the strength of this project, that it was put forward by the community and today is driven by the community. I work with the foundation board, and I'm delighted to have members of the board here with us today as well. But really, it's for the community, and it ultimately is a community project, and that is its strength. And I think that's why it will be successful. And we will certainly hope within the next 4 to 5 years that will be put forward to UNESCO and will be considered a UNESCO heritage site, enjoying the likes of the Taj Mahal as a UNESCO heritage site. That's the significance of what a UNESCO heritage site is. And of course, we'll be doing that with Canada. This is going to be a transnational project that will recognise the 2 cable stations on both sides of the Atlantic. So that's really exciting, because Canada are really good at doing UNESCO stuff. They're kind of black belts at it, and Ireland not so much. So really looking forward to working with Canada. Their cable station is already on their list. So now we'll be both going forward together as one project. So it's going to be really exciting. And later today, we're actually going to have a connection to Canada, to Heart's Content, to the cable station there. We're going to connect to them live in the third section of what we do today. So as I said, it's been an amazing journey for us on the project. The project started in 2010. Mary Rose Stafford, who's here in the back of the hall trying to hide, was very much the instigator of the project when she came down to the community and convinced them what they had here was quite unique. Theirs followed. There was many reports that were written, technical reports, archaeological studies of this building and other sites on the island. The cable station itself, this building was handed over to the community by the owner some years ago. And in fact, Norma Foley, who'll be joining us tonight, was the then Lord Mayor, the Mayor Kerry, and she came to accept the building. And we do like to think that the reason she was promoted to minister was because she accepted the building. So, so good things happen when you come here. Still waiting for my promotion, but apparently it does happen. And there's been a great community engagement with Canada. We've already linked with Heart's Content. We've had people from Heart's Content here, and it all culminated with the acceptance of the project onto the Irish tentative list, which involved exhaustive research and review by an international committee, by the way. And really, I want to recognise Kerry County Council. They were the organisation that put it forward. and John Griffin, who's not here. I think John should be here soon anyway. But John really did Trojan work to get that project over the line. And I couldn't go without acknowledging as well our colleague and late friend Anthony O'Connell from the island. It was Anthony's idea to do this, and Anthony was an amazing dynamo, and he built a kind of a momentum on this project that's still with us today. And so we do miss Anthony terribly. His family will be with us today and tonight, but we do miss him, and he was an amazing man, and we wouldn't be doing this, we wouldn't have got where we were going, and we won't get further without the momentum that he built. So, and I'd also, if I could, just thank, again, as we're in the moment, thank the many people who've helped us along the way, actually. We've had great support. BT, I'd like to call them out, they're sponsoring us again today. They sponsored us many times. They have a history in this project, of course. IDA, Fexco, LinkedIn, Intel, JP McManus, Brown Brothers Harriman, and Sean is with us from Brown Brothers. Again, thank you for your support, Sean. It's been really, really helpful. And ACCOCOMS, and Kevin's here from ACCOCOMS. So thank you for your continued support. Host in Ireland, Gary has joined us this year as a sponsor, and Aspen Grove has also sponsored us. So again, thanks to all our sponsors. We couldn't do it without the funding. And while we've had very generous funding from government to date, we can't do it without private funding. So we do really appreciate your help. This year has been a particularly busy year, actually. We've had this lovely exhibit that you're sitting in was formally opened yesterday, and now is open for visitors, so people can come and learn the story in a very interactive way. So I would encourage you to come back maybe tomorrow when it'll be fully kitted out, and you can be able to see the exhibit in action. So please do and do that, or come back during the summer with your family or friends. It's a very age-friendly exhibit, and people will really enjoy it. Also we had, and I want to recognise Donald DeCogan, who's with us. Dr. Donald DeCogan was with us today. Donald did an extraordinary report during the year that looked at the technical accomplishments of what happened here and how it was spread around the world. And it's an extraordinary report. It took 12 months to put together. It has 13 contributors, experts around the world commenting on it. And really want to be indebted to Donald for doing this incredible book, because it's one of the important aspects of UNESCO, that you have to be able to show that what happened here had an impact globally, and he has shown that in his book in the review. And finally, then we had this building itself has been fully designed. We've done a design on it, and the work on the building to convert the building into the upstairs predominantly into an innovation hub or a digital hub. Will start, we hope, later this year when the tender goes out. So when you come back in 2 years' time, this building will have been transformed not into just a heritage building, where you can see here, and other exhibits we've put in time, but also the upstairs will actually be a digital hub. So it'll come back to where it was. You know, the building was that digital hub of the world, and it's going to come back and be that again within a couple of years. So going forward, we really look forward to working with Canada, actually, on now driving really the project. There's also a socio-economic plan that's been put together for Valentia, and we much look forward to participating in that, and hopefully that'll be a benefit of UNESCO status. And that's pretty much it. So there'll be lots, as I said, what was that old Fianna Fáil saying? Help me out here, Norma. Lots done, more to do. Was that what it was? Is that okay? Got it. Okay. So lots more to do. So with that, I'll move on. I'll just talk about what we're going to do today. So we're going to invite now our two key speakers in a second, keynote speakers, and then we will have a panel discussion. Which Ambassador Cronin is going to take. Ambassador Smythe is going to take us through. I'll introduce the panel later. We'll break then around 4 o'clock, and then around 5 we'll come back and we're going to have the connection with Canada. So we'll have a live link up with Canada. We're going to have an exchange of views by young people on both sides about their future, how they see their future in these two remote areas of the two different countries, and indeed we'll have a greeting as well, again from Ambassador Smythe here, and we'll have Eamon McKee, who's the Irish Ambassador in Canada, calling in for a greeting as well. And we'll finish with a musical exchange. We'll have a traditional music standoff between Valentia and Heart's Content. So that'll finish off the day. Okay, so without further ado, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Eddie Hobbs, as is probably best known to you, as a co-writer and a presenter of RTE's Rip Off Republic show, which was very, very successful in 2005. He's done a number of shows since. He's also published 4 books. And indeed, an action fast thriller book just recently called The First Heresy, which I recommend. I read it's actually really good. Now, Eddie's my brother, so obviously I obviously think very highly of him. I think my mother wrote the notes I was supposed to say here. But no, I just personally, guys, I'm really proud of having my brother here. And with that, I'll hand over to Eddie and ask him to deliver his speech.
Thanks very much, Len. It was 14th of April, 1864, by the way, yeah, when Lincoln was shot. So I'm going to talk about history, geopolitics, and of course my normal ground, economics and finance, and try and blend this together in the theme. But I just first wanted to thank Leonard for inviting me to speak. When he asked me, I said that was very brave of you, given the last few years and what we've all gone through. And it was around this time, 35 years ago, that Leonard was giving the best man speech at our wedding in Kinsale, and he addressed his opening comments to the neighbours who were there to apologise for all of the broken memories they had of items that they cherished that I'd broken as a child. And it was downhill after that. So what I find fascinating about this project here is when it happened. And what happened during the hiatus between the failure of the first cable and the successful implementation of the second, which for me was the most important event which shaped the last century and is shaping our century, and that was the American Civil War. I think it was the birth of the United States. I don't think it was. I believe that to be the case. And for all of the various challenges that they had to go through and are still going through as a consequence of comments I'll make in just a moment. So I just find that very, very interesting. Just as the Battle of Waterloo in 1815 shaped the 19th century, I think the American Civil War, which gave birth to this new, vibrant, energetic, deeply flawed, deeply beautiful country, which is still an ongoing project in development, and it does shape the current, and it is still shaping the current century. So obviously, events substantially changed for all of us on the 24th of February when Putin decided to roll across the border and into the Ukraine, and that's still ongoing today, as you know. There are further developments happening all the time, and that's a huge change in global geopolitics. So I'm going to talk about that and try and stitch that in. And then give some thoughts on what I think is one of the ways we could all move forward. Now, there's a lot of people who believe that the world is going to head towards regionalization, and globalization is now in reverse, and the whole thing is going to change. I don't believe that to be the case at all. I think that the world is accelerating in the globalization phase. It might not be happening at structural or sovereign level, but it's certainly happening at individual human level. And we can see that with a huge increase in data traffic, which is surging up around 3.5 times over the last 5 or 6 years. Migration, an amount of people equivalent almost to the population of the United States moved around the world last year. We see it in foreign direct investment of, heading towards 2 trillion. It's still quite small relative to global GDP. So there's a huge amount of interconnection going on. And then when you look at Netflix top 10, the top film, most of the top films over the last year were foreign language programs. So Squid Game, which is a South Korean television program, drew an audience of 111 million, and that's the audience telling all of the policymakers worldwide what's really happening. And I think that's very, very encouraging. I also believe, and I'm starting and will end on a positive note, that as technology develops, and especially as video technology develops to a point where us ordinary people can have the same video quality as somebody running a global conference event, and once you get that kind of technology, and it's very, very close, you can start connecting human beings all over the world and join problem solving across all sorts of issues, from medical through to civil through to sports, etc. And I think we're very, very close to that. So for those out there whose careers are based on trying to reverse the process of globalization and trying to develop, regionalized bunkers throughout the world, they're going to be facing the human urge to collaborate and to explore and to have adventure moving forward. So that's my position on it. But I wanted just to start with the timeline that this occurred in, because the first person on the other side of the cable was James Buchanan, President James Buchanan, 15th President of the United States, regarded by a lot of people as probably the worst president the United States ever had. He failed to deal with secession. in the States. He failed to militarily arm the North to get ready for what was coming, which was quite clearly coming. He didn't reinforce Fort Sumter, which was the opening phase of the American Civil War, and he particularly was in favor of the U.S. Supreme Court ruling in 1857 on the Dred Scott case, which was, Scott was an American, African-American man, family man, married to Harriet. They had 2 daughters, Lisa and Liz, and this was a case in the Supreme Court which ruled that these people, although they had spent 4 years in Wisconsin, which didn't have, which was a slave-free state, the Supreme Court ruled that they were not citizens. They were not citizens, and therefore they didn't have the right to be in court. And I thought that was quite extraordinary. And what it told us about Buchanan was that he was like the president that followed Lincoln, which was Andrew Johnson, who was probably the second worst president the United States ever had. So you had 2 lousy presidents with one of the most extraordinary people that ever held public office in any part of the world, Lincoln in between, which is amazing. Lincoln chose Andrew Johnson as his running mate when he was trying to be re-elected in the middle of a civil war, which was really wearying on the North. And he wasn't going to get re-elected. He was definitely not going in his favor until Sherman took Atlanta, which was the commercial hub of the South, and basically cut the Confederate States of America in 2, and then marched across Georgia to the Carolinas while Grant was attacking through northern Virginia. These were extraordinary times, extraordinary people on both sides. Sherman, by the way, just as a side note, Sherman there was a favour done from him, really, in the sense that the South decided to appoint John Bell Hood as its lead commander in the west of the country, and they failed to appoint their most successful commander, who was the lead officer in the Confederacy, who was non-native born. And he was born in Ballincollig in Cork. He was the son of the GPs. His name was Francis Ronan Cleburne. And the reason why he wasn't appointed, despite his fantastic career, was because the year before, in 1863, he proposed, by way of a memo which he sent throughout the army and in the civil authorities in Richmond, that they should free the slaves to fight for the South. And he was absolutely castigated for doing so. But when it was too late, they decided to do that, but then, it was all over. Should have never started first day, but that's where we were. Andrew Johnson went on then to be impeached, and won the impeachment by just 1 vote. So I find that very interesting. What's particularly interesting for me, really, is the legacy that Johnson left from my reading of it, is that he allowed the failed states, the states that were forced back into the Union through military power, to allow them to once again run their own affairs, especially when it came to African American rights. And then you had the Jim Crow laws. And as a consequence of that, we simply don't know how many thousands of African Americans were lynched over the next 100 years. There's no record on the number of rapes and beatings and horrific torture and crime against other people of a different colour, which occurred over 100 years. And I often wonder, if Lincoln had survived and Grant had come in with Lincoln as his mentor, if the United States today wouldn't be substantially different. But that didn't happen, and we're left with the legacy of that. But the important thing for me about all of that is that, when you look through what happened next, we go to the Franco-Prussian War in the 1870s, and then of course the First World War was really the end of the monarchies. So the monarchies as economies were destroyed. I mean, the British Empire was on its last legs, really, at the end of the First World War. The Austro-Hungarian Empire was destroyed. And then we had the veneration then of the state, which is the rise of fascism in Germany and in Italy and in Spain. And of course, we had clerical fascism in Ireland, of our own brand of it, all the ways up to the 1960s, when the president was stooping to kiss the monster's ring. So, and we're only just free of that legacy now ourselves. So we then come through to, the events of the Second World War. If it hadn't been for the American involvement in the Second World War, the outcome would have been completely different, as we all know. We then had a settlement at the end of the Second World War, which is the Bretton Woods Agreement. And the Bretton Woods Agreement, what it did was it gave rise to the IMF, it gave rise to the World Bank. And these became the first major international institutions to try and regulate how we go about managing our economic and financial affairs, because when they're not properly regulated and controlled, they lead to conflict. It leads to war. So the Bretton Woods Agreement pegged the US dollar to gold, and then all of the other currencies pegged themselves to the US dollar. So there was a kind of a gold anchor underneath the whole system. But unfortunately, the cost of the Vietnam War, which went on for a prolonged period of time, meant that the US was under quite a lot of pressure, and Nixon decided in 1971 to break the gold standard temporarily. Of course, it wasn't temporary, and that gave rise to the next 50 years of debt-driven economic expansion, which is the phase we're in at the moment, and we're now coming to the end of that phase, which is why I believe Putin is engaged in what he's engaged in, and I'll stitch all that together in a moment. So we come forward to the breaking of the gold standard. This then gave rise to debt-driven financing. The USA was in a very privileged position of now being in command of the world reserve currency, so it almost had an open-ended ability to borrow money from the rest of the world, and that's still ongoing. It's a very privileged position to be in, and we're still in that position today. But what has happened over the last 50 years, after 10 years of very high inflation from 1972 to about 1983, the head of the US Federal Reserve, a guy called Volcker, stood on the brakes and increased interest rates very, very quickly to about 1.5 times the inflation rate and killed it dead. The result of that was then the start of Reaganomics on the American side and Thatcher's thinking here on the European side. So we had the start of kind of neoliberal kind of economics, let's call it that, which was the legacy created. Now the world then went through a period in the 90s of hyper globalization. That's now come to an end. The World Bank report out only 2 weeks ago indicates this quite significantly. There's no headwinds where there was tailwinds on globalization. So the dividend of hyper-globalization is over, low-cost labor and all of that. China has become, quite wealthy relative to where it came from. And we have emerging strength in these economies, as well as India. And so it should be. So that's changed. But what's also quite clear from the World Bank report is that the expected growth rates this year, which are around 5.7%, are now going to be half that, around 2.7 to 2.8%. So there's much lower growth. The world actually is, in my opinion, is quite close to a potential recession globally, and maybe we'll escape it. But certainly Europe is in a very difficult position compared to everybody else, which I'll come to in a moment. So obviously, when you look at globalization, the biggest risks to globalization is the risks to the planet. I mean, you could have nuclear catastrophe. We've been living with that for decades. We can have climate and environmental catastrophe. We can also have technology catastrophe. And there's significant risks here as well. No more so evident than the way the Chinese run their society, which you may be aware of. There's 200 million surveillance cameras. There's digital ID. You're being ruthlessly controlled by the center. And the view is that the Chinese are prepared to give up individual civil liberties and freedoms for security and control from the center. And that remains really to be tested into the future, whether that's going to hold or not. They have their own significant problems at the moment in their property market, and we'll see how they weather that. So then, for me, however, and I'll be ending with this, by the way, when I get to it, and that's that the way the show has been run over the last 10 or 15 years really is not conducive to harmony at all. And we're seeing that. I mean, if you look at the S&P 500, which is the US stock market, wealth has increased by 5 or 6-fold since 2009, which was the trough after the global financial crisis. And workers' wages have only gone up around 45%. So there's a huge divide between those that are actually doing the work and those that actually own the assets. And when you see a billionaire, deciding to go into outer space, while the staff who are paying for it on minimum wage, and people doing 2 jobs just trying to make a living. It really doesn't sit well in the gut. You see the same thing with the climate conference recently in Glasgow, the number of planes that were, the private planes flying in, telling us all how we all should run our affairs. And I would have significant concerns about that, especially the agenda that is an open display from the World Economic Forum, recently endorsed by van der Leyen, the chief of the EU, and also by the UN, which is the reset agenda. And I've nothing against a reset agenda at all. What I've against is the fact that it's not being discussed in democratic chambers. It's not going through, the pretty robust political processes that are there in different countries. It's being dictated to us by an elite. And then when you see our politicians going to these events, Davos, Bilderberg, and so on, almost as supplicants, it really is a problem if we're going to have a proper globalized world into the future, where people, which I think is possible, provided we have transparency and accountability for those engaged in making these decisions, not people who are professional civil servants inside institutions that are not accountable to democratic chambers. That's where we've got a problem. And that problem needs to be addressed, because right now, as I speak, there are significant protests going on in Germany, in Italy, and especially in Holland against this kind of reset agenda. And there's a significant friction now occurring between people and those that are telling us how the new world is to be shaped, because they've decided to do so. They've decided this in private conference settings. In terms of the events of February 24th, I remember I was being interviewed the following day by Mario Rosenstock, of all people, and this came up because the news had just broken the day before that the Russians had actually gone over the border into the Ukraine. And I was immediately talking, as I'm supposed to do, I was immediately talking to geopolitical people that I have connections with to say, well, what is really going on, rather than what we're being told is going on. Because, my confidence in the fourth estate is very limited after the last couple of years, especially in Ireland. I think that that really needs to be addressed into the future. The fourth estate, of course, is journalism. I think journalism has died in Ireland. I know this. I deal with the editors. I deal with RT. I can quote you chapter and verse. But I do believe that to be the case. And it's a critical part of our democracy that we actually have institutions that are openly challenging the establishment, challenging its views, challenging its data, and bringing the results to the people to actually engage with and read and debate. I think that's terribly, terribly important, and we haven't had that at all, especially over the last couple of years during the pandemic. Just to give you a small example of that, in June 2021, Beaumont Hospital announced that it was now not going to give life-saving organ transplants to anybody who wasn't vaccinated, and were bumping the unvaxxed off the organ transplant list. And that letter, which I got a copy of and published, was initially met with skepticism that it was a fake letter, that this couldn't be happening. So RT did not report on that matter. It knocked around for about a week. Finally, it got coverage in one of the newspapers, and within 24 hours, Beaumont Hospital had reversed its decision. I had made a personal communication to the chief of news, head of news in RTE, about that matter at the time, asking why this wasn't being addressed by RTE. And I got back a message to say, I'm too busy to deal with this. I'm trying to get a couple of journalists out of Afghanistan. So this was the attitude at the time. People probably don't know this. I'm just saying this by way of passing. But 153 is an interesting number. 153 is the total number of deaths in Ireland over a 2-year period, purely from COVID, according to the CSO reported through the hospital system. 153, of which 50% were over the age of 85. None of that has been reported by mainstream media. So even within the last 24 hours, there's been a complete clear out of journalists at the Sunday Times. What's happened to the media is that it's been hollowed out by competition from social media. And it's almost now competing against social media for kind of cheap headlines and opinion and all that kind of stuff. And there's very little real journalism going on because the capital and money and resources and capacity isn't there, and it needs to be seriously rebuilt. And that's not just a problem in Ireland, it's especially a problem in Ireland. It's also a problem in other countries, as we can see when we turn on our televisions. So we come then to Russia. So Putin, what I've learned is that Putin, from the get-go, the kinetic war is happening in the Ukraine. We know that, we're watching it very closely every day, and it's horrific. But Putin's real target is the European Union, and the heart of the European Union is Germany. And he's weaponizing his energy, as you know. Germany has become so dependent on Russia that Putin has decided so basically we have a kinetic war going on in the Ukraine, but we are all in a global economic and financial war. All of us are in it, but we just don't feel it because it's happening at an economic and financial level. But it's extremely serious, and it has a lot of meaning for all of us. So Europe itself, if Russia decides to cut the gas to Germany, which I believe is almost a certainty, Germany is going to go into a deep recession, and it's going to all happen quite quickly. Italy is in difficulty because interest rates are rising, and Italian bonds are now are spiking again. The actual cost of paying, for Italy to service its national debt, it's at 150% of debt to GDP. And at the heart of the European Union, if you look at it from a Russian perspective, you have target 2. So Putin was there at the fall of the Soviet Union. And when the Soviet Union fell, one of the things that people forget is that the central bank in Russia ended up picking up a huge bill. And the bill was all of the liabilities on its balance sheet that were owed to it by all of the other central banks in all of the various countries that made up the Soviet Union. Well, the Bundesbank has about 2 trillion under target 2 every day, owed to it by various banks throughout the European Union. So if the Eurozone itself was to fracture, Germany would fracture. Germany itself is facing significant rationing of its energy. It looks like it's going to face significant rationing of its energy over the winter period. And I think Putin is betting or gambling that the Germans won't hold, that the consumers simply won't put up with it, and that German industry won't be able to deal with it. No, I think he's wrong, but I think that's his strategy. He's also looking at fomenting. He's also looking at fomenting crisis throughout the periphery of Europe. So don't be surprised if the Balkans flares up. We have an ultranationalist head in Serbia. Serbia is pro-Russian, and we have in Bosnia as well the commencing of more Serbian nationalism there. He's looking at NATO, and he sees Article 5 requires a consensus vote. He's looking at Turkey. He knows that Turkey is a doubt on that, but especially Hungary under Orban is a doubt on it, and he's demonstrated that so far. He's not playing as a member of the club. Putin sees that. He's financing ultra-right and ultra-left political movements in Germany, Die Linke, which is in old Eastern Germany, which is on the left. The left is what it's called, and AfD. These are 2 political organisations I think you'll see will grow, especially if we do start getting economic strife in Germany and in other countries. He's also looking at the Suwalki Gap, which is a line between Poland and Lithuania. So it effectively technically it splits the Baltics from the rest of Europe. And this is a right of way, let's call it that runs from Belarus across to Kaliningrad, which is the Russian Baltic base. And he has the right to move his military along that line. He can't stop there, but he has the right to move his military along that line. And these are all points of vulnerability. And of course, Moldova as well is an ongoing point of vulnerability on a corner of the Ukraine. So how all that will play out, well, I don't know. But what I do know is that Putin's aim is he sees an opportunity to greatly diminish the North Atlantic Alliance. Not just the NATO alliance, then the whole idea of North Atlantic power. He sees this as a huge opportunity. If he can fatally damage the European Union, if he can diminish it, he will diminish the United States of America. This is his mindset. So I see that as being a critically important part of his thinking to understand. They're also bringing out a currency. This has been prepared a long time. This isn't just something he's recently done. This is a gold-backed, commodity-backed currency on a twin circuit. And he's recruiting Brazil, India, China, and Iran to come into this multi-currency platform, which he hopes will be a direct challenge to the US dollar as the world reserve currency on the other side of the conflict in the Ukraine. So that's what I see happening. In terms of globalization, as I said earlier, we have the things that can derail it: climate, climate especially, I suppose, and technology, the abuse of technology to control human populations is a real risk, especially in countries that do not cherish liberal freedoms as we do. And that liberal freedom, that thing about cherishing liberal freedom, we're inclined to go to sleep on the wheel on it quite often and not understand just how crucial it is, because these are things that are not in China and they're not in Russia. We were recently over in the Baltics, and we had originally planned to go to St. Petersburg. You can't go there because if you say the wrong thing, you could end up just disappearing for a few weeks. The Russians themselves cannot now talk openly about their own affairs. So for me, moving forward, one of the most important things that we can do as a country here, and many other countries can do, is the implementation of the Social Progress Index. So this is an index that measures the complete opposite to GDP. It measures progress along health, education, public transport, justice, childcare, pensions, and long-term care, and that comprises into one index which tells the public how the different parts of the state are performing at the interface with their public, and whether the GDP growth that is being generated by all of these fantastic companies is actually being translated into improvements on the ground at the ordinary citizen level. So if you get a 5% increase in GDP, you should be getting 5% plus increase in your social progress index. That's all there to be done. And I think that was one of the ways that we could bring the two ends together, the very top, the elite at the top of the neoliberal economics, and the people on the ground. And finally, just to conclude, I've often thought, and I thought it again when I was framing these comments, that the most important words written in human history, certainly in recent human history, were written by Lincoln when he visited Gettysburg in November 1863. The battle was during the summer. And what he said in such a short few words really was quite remarkable. And when you look at those words today and you transplant it into where we are today, which is a huge pivot as Putin tries to bring forward this Eurasian empire, with Europe shrunk to create space for Moscow at the center of this huge landmass, with China at the other end of it, and the Americans minding their own business across the Atlantic as he would see it. So what Lincoln said to me really is more than just a call to action. It's a call to understand just how important liberal freedoms are. So I just wanted to quote a couple of sentences from the Gettysburg Address because I think it is so important. He said, "67 years ago our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation or any nation so conceived and so dedicated can long endure." And we're back to that, in my opinion, with what's going on. And then he finished off his last sentence, "that we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth." Thank you.
Thanks, Ed. Very good. I'll tell Mum you did a great job. Thanks. That was really a lot of great stuff there. Thank you. We'll move on, folks, in the interest of time. I'm delighted now to welcome next to the podium Ambassador Claire Cronin, who was nominated by President Joe Biden in June 23, 2021. But before she got here, of course, she was the first woman to serve as the majority House leader in the House of Representatives of Massachusetts. So quite the accomplishment, and has a significant legislative background, particularly in solving major criminal justice and policy reform, and it's also a very strong support of education policy. So with that, Ambassador.
It's always tough when you begin a speech and you're following the words of Lincoln. Tough act to follow. So I just want to say thank you for the very kind introductions. Ambassador Smith, distinguished guests, members of the Valentia Transatlantic Cable Foundation, and members of the Valentia Island Development Company, good afternoon. Thanks so much for having me here today. When Leonard Hobbs first approached us on behalf of the Valentia Transatlantic Cable Foundation with an invitation to participate today, I was thrilled for the opportunity to represent the U.S. Embassy here. And today's theme, which is a mouthful, globalization, our interconnected and interdependent world, has never been more timely or more important for future peace and prosperity, joint prosperity. The digital economy has closed the distance between countries and between people. A video and dingle can go viral and be seen in my hometown in Brockton, Massachusetts in the blink of an eye. However, despite our miraculous ability to connect virtually, the COVID pandemic has made it clear the importance of the physical connections between us, which run deeper than we ever knew. At the outset of the pandemic, Americans were shocked to run low on basic household items. COVID-related shutdowns in major ports led to significant global supply chain disruptions. Up until then, many gave little thought about how far these products travel to get to their local shelves. In the past year, we've learned that the shortage of available new cars and trucks was because of a global microchip shortage. And who would have guessed that the ingredients in pharmaceutical products or face masks would now be considered a measure of national security? For all of our progress, all of this change, we are brought back to a fundamental truth. We cannot go it alone. People can't, and countries can't. I began my career practicing law. My primary goal was to represent the people who entrusted me with honesty and integrity. That goal has remained true throughout my professional career, including, of course, as U.S. Ambassador to Ireland. Whether it be President Biden, the talented staff at the U.S. Embassy, or our Irish partners, that duty to serve remains steadfast. The skills honed as a lawyer and as a mediator continue to serve me well to this day. I learned to exercise perception muscles and empathy muscles, and I understand how the skills developed as a litigator applied to numerous fields and careers. This includes the ability to understand other people, their motivations, and what restricts them. It's a tremendous asset to bring to all kinds of relationships, new ones and old ones, professional and personal, allied and adversarial. It's a vital skill in diplomacy and a key one for today's discussion. The borderless nature of today's threats require international collaboration between governments and public-private cooperation with businesses and civil society. We must approach these issues together. I reiterate, no one country or person can do it alone. In law, politics, and particularly in public service, relationships are paramount. Of the three, politics sometimes has a negative reputation. I'll dispute that any day. John F. Kennedy was once asked why such a fine person was entering the dirty world of politics. And he replied, "Political action is the highest responsibility of a citizen." President Biden echoed this sentiment, saying, "If you do politics the right way, I believe you can actually make people's lives better." And integrity is the minimum ante to get into the game. I agree that politics improves people's lives when practiced with empathy, relationship building, and people striving together to tackle common challenges. And we would do well to walk in the footprints of these fine Irish Americans who I have just quoted. And similarly, whether you are a legislator, a diplomat, business person, or a civic-minded citizen, relationships are everything. We all find ourselves representing people with needs, desires, hopes, and dreams. And when you know and understand people better, what their interests are, how they are affected by local challenges, what causes they champion, it is easier to move ahead, find consensus, and improve lives. Whether you call it empathy or social responsibility, or as we do in diplomacy, mutual understanding, it breaks down barriers between us and opens a world of possibilities. Therefore, meeting together at forums like this are so important. When we socialize together, sit together across the table and dine, and have meaningful conversations with each other, we create opportunities for collaboration. It becomes much harder to vilify someone you have come to appreciate as a person rather than as an issue. Before coming to Ireland in Dublin, I saw this play out in the Massachusetts legislature. Functionally, no matter what party the governor belongs to, if the Democratic leaders, Massachusetts is a very Democratic state, if the Democratic leaders and Democratic majorities in the House and Senate really wanted to, they could ram through anything that suited their fancy. But that's a short-sighted strategy. Eventually, it will not just be the minority who come to resent such heavy-handedness, but members of your own team who recognize that there is a better way to do things and a healthier way to get to yes. Similarly, we must work together to restore trust among people from all different backgrounds. When you know a person and where they are coming from, it is so much easier to accept their handshake in the way it was meant. The wisest among us move forward by making it a habit to collaborate, to listen, and to incorporate diverse views that accept there are different ways of doing things. And despite so much gut-wrenching evidence to the contrary, it is possible to do this on the world stage, and nothing is more important. We still grapple with the effects of the devastation incurred by the pandemic. We see firsthand the negative effects of climate change. We continue to struggle to live up to our democratic ideals, preserving a world where diversity, equity, inclusion, and access are assured for all. In Ukraine, and far too many other places in the world, innocent people are oppressed by those motivated by power and greed. What is happening in Ukraine is a tragedy. It is essential to take a moment to express our ongoing support for Ukraine and for all those who have suffered at the hands of Russian aggression. We applaud the generosity of the Irish government and the Irish people for housing and supporting displaced Ukrainians. It's impressive that in a country of just over 5 million people, it has accepted over 40,000, probably nearing closer to 45,000 displaced Ukrainians. And everyone we have met on this issue, from the Taoiseach to the small businessman has said the same thing over and over. We're going to do the right thing, and it is the right thing to do. And every time I hear those words, I have a renewed faith of optimism in the good of people. President Biden has asked all of our like-minded Democratic partners and friends to continue to build upon our unprecedented sanctions to hold Putin accountable. Ireland, like many others, has met that call. Our collective measures will sap Putin's military-industrial complex of critical components, prevent the central bank's foreign reserves from propping up an ailing economy, and deprive Putin of the resources he needs to wage this war. We need to hold the kleptocracy to account for all of its ill-gotten gains. These sanctions are hard and have challenged our economies and our citizens. It is difficult to read how the high energy costs impact Irish households, especially the most economically vulnerable. The same thing has happened in other countries and across the United States. I hear from friends and families in Massachusetts about the hardships brought by high fuel and energy costs. We knew from the start that standing up to Putin would be hard and that it would hurt. But I have never been prouder of the US-EU solidarity in pushing back against Putin's naked aggression. It is only by working together that we can tackle this and other great challenges facing the world today. On a happier note, since arriving in Ireland, my family and I have been delighted by the warm welcome of the Irish people. It is truly the experience of a lifetime. I'm humbled that President Biden has entrusted me as his representative at such a critical time. And along with the U.S. Embassy, we will continue to meet this challenge. As the U.S. Ambassador to Ireland, the value of our relationships, of our people-to-people ties, is even more apparent. Each new person we meet and talk to helps build the two-way understanding that we so fervently believe in. And that is why, in these first months in Ireland, my first goal was to travel to all 26 countries and the North as well. And so far, I am up to 22, second time in County Kerry, and I can tell you that the number will be 26 very soon. These visits are an opportunity to understand the great diversity within Ireland, to see great innovation, meet people of all backgrounds, and most gratifying, to hear the stories of friendship and collaboration between our countries. This is also true in Dublin. Opening the doors of the embassy and our home is one of utmost importance, and we want to make sure that all, as the U.S. Embassy in Dublin, we welcome people who may not have had the opportunity to visit Deerfield in the past. As part of that effort, we recently launched a program called Open Doors, inviting different groups of students to visit the residence each week. Have to say it's my favorite part of the week. The first few visits have been wonderful, and we can't wait to start up again in the fall. Engaging with amazing young people reinforces my optimism about our future, but I always remind them that their voices are equally as important today. When we meet, I encourage them to think about expanding their horizons, including summer work and travel opportunities in the U.S., always promoting that J-1 visa. I'm sure many of you may even be alumni of the J-1 program and how important these exchanges are for our countries. What better way to promote empathy and mutual understanding than that? It's often noted that the United States and Ireland share a relationship underpinned by strong historical and familial ties. This enduring friendship is sustained by our commitment to democratic values and further bolstered by our thriving economic cooperation. This cooperation is critical as we come to work together to overcome challenges. And Ireland is a vitally important hub in the transatlantic digital economy. The largest technology companies, including over 900 US companies, are expanding their footprint here. And consequently, the importance of cybersecurity cannot be overstated. Cyber attacks against Ireland pose a threat not only here, but to global security. The personal data of over a third of all citizens from NATO and EU member states transits through Ireland on a regular basis. Ireland is a digital target, not because who it is as a country, but because of what it has built within its borders. The borderless nature of cyber threats require international collaboration between governments and robust public-private cooperation with businesses and civil society. The ransomware attack against the HSE last year sadly demonstrated that Irish neutrality is insufficient armor against transnational criminal organizations and malign states who do not care for such distinctions. The importance of nurturing our bilateral relationship is obvious in our business relationship. Today, more than ever before, we must work as trusted partners with common values to support complex supply chains and to promote two-way trade and investment. And it is a two-way trade and investment story. We are thankful that when millions of Americans needed their life-saving cancer drugs or ventilators to keep them breathing in intensive care units, the companies in Ireland never faltered in providing these products to the United States, despite the spike in demand here and worldwide. To the US, European, and Irish companies represented in this room, thank you for being trusted vendors in every sense of the word. Ireland's phenomenal economic transformation is the perfect example of cross-party consensus for the greater good. I remember my first visit to Ireland in the early 1990s to attend my brother's wedding. Flash forward to when I landed in Dublin 6 months ago, it did not feel as much like a different city as it felt like an entirely different world. And every place I have subsequently visited has experienced similar economic change. No single party can take credit for Ireland's economic explosion. Different parties in successive governments put aside political fights to agree to a common set of economic principles to be implemented by whomever is in power. And what a result. The whole world knows of Ireland's rise from one of the poorest European countries to now one of its richest. Ireland's economic miracle was not just founded on sound economic principles, but more importantly, on sound political governance and cooperation. And that is a lesson too little of the world knows. The United States and Ireland partnership is a great example of how two countries can work together to grow jobs and foster prosperity on both sides. The footprint of American companies in Ireland continues to expand. Walking the factory floors of companies such as Pfizer in Cork and Intel in Kildare, we are inspired by the innovation and sophisticated manufacturing that is taking place right here in Ireland. And more than 150 years ago, when the first transatlantic cable was being laid right here in Valentia, who would have thought that in 2022, Irish companies would be leading global solutions such as healthcare and technology in the United States? Recently, I was fortunate enough to lead the largest ever delegation of Irish companies to Washington, D.C. for the 2022 Select USA Investment Summit. This included a record number of 7 women-led Irish businesses who are looking to grow their companies across the United States. And during the summit, the delegation learned about opportunities to invest in the United States. And as we track their investment journeys, which we do at the embassy, what impressed me most was the camaraderie and support the Irish companies shared with each other. The new relationships and friendships being built between these entrepreneurs and their new investment destinations will carry them to success. And again, we go back to the importance of people-to-people ties to forge success in an increasingly fragile and unpredictable world. The bond between Ireland and the United States will serve us well in the future. The Irish generosity and willingness to share your global ambition to succeed is well matched by American openness to do business with trusted partners worldwide. And further, as members of the United Nations Security Council, we will work closely to ensure dignity, equity, and freedom for all around the world. We must not take our remarkable friendship for granted, though. It must continually be nourished, nurtured, and developed in a rapidly changing world. The U.S. Embassy will always look forward to collaborating, listening, and incorporating different viewpoints. And I will close my remarks with this. I am often asked here and back home what I have learned about or surprised me here in Ireland. And as I come from Massachusetts, which I always say is the epicenter of U.S.-Irish relations, despite what New Yorkers or Chicagoans will tell you, and being a proud Irish American, I thought I had a pretty strong understanding about all things Ireland and Irish when I arrived, and boy was I wrong. This beautiful island continues to surprise me on a regular basis, and the Irish people never cease to amaze me. So when people ask me to explain this wonderfully complicated island and its people in a nutshell, I now have a new answer. Ireland is the only country in the world where the 2 most popular sporting leagues, hurling and Gaelic football, are played by unpaid amateurs. The largest outdoor sporting event is a national plowing competition, and the television event of the year is the Late Late Toy Show. So for these and other reasons, my love for this country grows deeper every day. So I thank you.
Great. Thanks very much, Ambassador. And you didn't even mention the Rose of Tralee. So, okay, that's one to look forward to. Okay, so we're moving now into our next section. And again, thank Ambassador very much for those great comments. So we're slightly different topic now. We're going to change our topic to talk about regional development. And It's obviously it's a topic that both our previous speakers, of course, have already mentioned, and in terms of regionalisation, how the world has changed through technology, and it no more so relevant to what happened here in terms of the cable, and indeed what happens here today in terms of this being a remote part of Ireland. So we're going to have a panel discussion now. We're going to be joined by Nancy Smythe, Ambassador Nancy Smythe, who. Just a little bit about Nancy. Actually, she started out after graduating, working in looks like lots of international things. Actually, she was part of for a decade working Canada's International Development Research Centre, and then entered politics or not politics, the political world, in working in the Foreign Affairs and International Trade of Canada, where she was Deputy Director of Policy and Planning, and most recently, then before arriving in Ireland here, she was Director General of Social Development in Canada's Global Issues and Development Branch, and responsibilities for education, gender equality, child protection, and many other topics. So with that, we'll ask maybe Nancy to join us here on the stage, or maybe take one of the seats here. And what I'll do then is I'm going to introduce our panelists, once I can find my notes here. Yes, here we go. So delighted to would have three diverse panelists, I guess. First of all, June O'Connell. June is founder and director of Skellig Distillers Limited. Skellig, so you can get your best gin. Please do grab a bottle before you leave, those of you who are travelling here. And formerly a corporate lawyer for Stephen Fry in Dublin. So June has come to Valentia. I think from Valentia, or from South Kerry, but has shown that what can be done in an environment like this and how you can build a business, albeit in a remote part of Ireland. Gary Connolly. Gary describes himself as a stubborn digital optimist, impatient learner, enthusiastic beginner, possibilitist. I can't even say that, Gary, to do that for me. A common sense practitioner. Gary founded Host in Ireland, which is a really active grouping that's looking and supporting the management, I guess, of digital assets. And again, the ambassador spoke quite a bit about that today, and just concentration of digital assets in Ireland. Again, something that I think the people who were involved in this project over 160 years ago would be dreamed about. And Gary's going to talk about that in the panel. And finally, from the locality here, Councillor Norma Moriarty. And again, I'd actually like to recognise Norma for the great support she's been to this project now for many years. She's always at her events. She's always very supportive wherever she can be. She's a teacher by profession. She's a community activist. And as I said, a great supporter for a UNESCO project, Norma, so I really want to acknowledge that and thank you for that. So with that, perhaps we ask our panelists to join us as well.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks very much, Ambassador. Thanks for your great speech. Thank you, another Mr. Hobbs. Great to meet you and great to be here. And thanks to Leonard and thanks to all the community. And thanks to our panelists here. So as Leonard has said, we're going to switch gears a little bit, but certainly very, very appropriate, I think, thematic here for our afternoon around regional development, redefined in a remote working world. How many times have we said that now, remote working world? So we're going to actually start with you, June, and I'm going to pass the mic and just ask you, Leonard gave a little bit of an introduction, but tell us a bit more about your story. What led you from being a successful business owner in corporate law in Dublin to the establishment of this distillery that I think most of us would have come by on our way here in South Kerry?
Thank you, Ambassador Smythe. I often wonder that myself, and I don't think it was one particular thing. So I am from this place, I'm of this place, my mother, my father, grandfathers, etc. And I, like most people of my generation, would have left at 18. Lucky enough to go to university, got a fantastic education here. Never really thought, okay, that's it, I'm done. Lucky enough to have stayed in Ireland, which wouldn't have been the case for my father's siblings or my grandfather's siblings, who single-handedly, I think, make up the entire population of Worcester, Massachusetts. So I always had a very close link to here. I practiced law, practiced corporate law. Always my clients were businesses. And I suppose there comes a stage in everyone's life when you think to yourself, do I have energy to do something else? Would I like to do something else? I think for both of you, you're in a new chapter in your careers in terms of being here. And at that stage, we were looking at setting up a business, and I knew that to have the energy that it takes to set up a business, and it takes a lot of energy and determination, it had to be something that was embedded here at home, because I wanted to spend more time here. And also, I wanted my dubs to come here more often for elocution lessons, which I think was very important. But also, I suppose, on a serious note, when I said at the start, you know, it wasn't just one thing. I often used to find myself in Dublin being in a big corporate law firm with the Californian and New York and Brussels offices. People would often pick up the phone and say, listen, Mary's really interested in law, would you have a chat with her? Or Tom is very interested in law. And very often it was people from this region, the Skellig Coast. And I thought to myself, you know what, Toronto, Dallas, Dublin doesn't need another bright young thing from Valentia, right? Valentia needs to keep Carsavine, Waterville, Ballinskelligs. We need to keep our bright young things here, and they want to be here. And I think that's the difference from my generation. And I make myself sound like I'm 150, but I left Carsavine in 1988 to go to university, so you can do your sums. But certainly there are choices now, and the remote technical element, which I think my colleagues on the panel are going to talk to more to. From a business perspective, the spirits business, and we are very much in the whiskey space as well, as a global business. We have never found problems finding excellence here. And in the context of the remote conversation, you know, when you're surrounded by the Atlantic on three sides and the highest mountains in Ireland are at the back of you, and the weather dictates what you do, and that's in our DNA here. That's how we roll. It hasn't been difficult to find excellence here. We're very ambitious for the business, and it's great to spend more time home. So that was a very long answer to your question.
Not long at all, and I think it was a great opening to the panel, and I think you really bridged the personal story, you know, to the local story, the regional story, and the global story. And so, Gary, we are going to turn to you next and pass the mic. And there has been discussion, as Leonard said, about this growing industry of digital assets. What a term that maybe we wouldn't have used so long ago. But of course, we're tracing those roots to the establishment of this cable station here and all of the history that we're living with and thinking about in Valentia. So just talk to us a bit about Ireland, about this housing of digital assets that the ambassador and others have spoken about, and what role does Ireland play in this digital world today? How in this new world, where we say location doesn't matter, maybe location doesn't always matter, or perhaps it matters less. But talk to us a bit about what new possibilities are there for geographically isolated some of these remote communities such as Valentia, or indeed Heart's Content in my own country in Newfoundland. So Gary, over to you. Big question.
Well, the first thing is I'm the dub, so I'm so glad that we let you win the semi-final a couple of weeks ago, because I mightn't have been as welcome down here if we had been taking the place. The other thing I want to do, if you don't mind, is set some context for all of what we're talking about. Yeah, you did. Over here on the left-hand side, if you have a look over, you'll see that it took 12 days by a steamer to bring a little note in 1850. 1958, the first message was 10 minutes per word. It took 18 hours for the message to go from Buchanan over to the Queen, yeah? Here's a piece of the latest fibre optic cable that is AE1. It's by a company that's in the room. It's our friends in AECom. This could do 170 times every book ever written in 1 second. Okay? That's the context that we're talking about. It's a terabit, 170 terabits this can do. There's about a terabit of data. So this is the world we're living in. What we also need, I'll sit down, I guess, otherwise I'll. You know, there's a great saying, isn't there? The future's here on the planet, it's just not evenly distributed. Okay? So there are places where there are technologies like surveillance that was mentioned, but there's good sides to surveillance too. It hasn't been implemented everywhere. It's all data. So I was trying to weave through a story, because we're all about history today, and we're trying to connect in context. So I went back only 1 week to Wellington for the rugby match that took place last week. And there was another first, wasn't it? We won 2 matches, we won a series. But what was really interesting, and notwithstanding what Eddie said about journalism, maybe it hasn't traversed over to sports journalism yet, because on the New Zealand Times, top of it, it said, Ireland were brave, creative, and relentless. And I said, oh, that's interesting. Then I did the research of why we're here and Cyrus and the boys. And do you know what they were? brave, creative, relentless. Many times did the cable break? Christ, they'd no map. There was no guide. They were relentless, but they were very brave. So when I thought about it, then I said, you know what? You and your group are brave, creative, and relentless. It's taken you 10 years to get to this point. Wonderful, right? It's a great thing for us maybe to take away as a, well, maybe that's the model of, and when we look at Ireland then, which is why I've been asked to talk, when you look at Whittaker, I think he was a faller, was he? TK. Was he? Was he a Fianna Fáiler? Well, he was in the fold. He took a decision in '58 without actually talking to his other ministers that he was going to make secondary education free. No, O'Malley. Yeah, he was briefing Whittaker, right? They made a decision, a brave decision. Oh no, we're not going to go to the Dáil. Let's just make the decision, it's the best thing. So therein lies why we now, I see Mark Redmond here from the American Chamber of Commerce, why has Ireland got 700 foreign direct investment companies? Why has it got, it's the pedigree of the education system. When we talk about data, to give you more context, because I realize there's a lot of different backgrounds here, we've had 4 industrial revolutions in the world since 1790s. The first one was driven by steam. The second one was driven by electricity. The third one was driven by microchips. This one is data. So in our minds, when we're trying to think how important is, how crucial is data, think of steam. Then we get to the stage, to your point about data security. It's not the data that matters, same way as it's not the steam that matters. It's the insights you get from it, or pointing the steam at a piston that drove water out of the mines. So that's the context for why in 2022, Ireland would have, and sorry again, Eddie, I'd love to be using one of your quotes, but David McWilliams has said, officially now, Ireland has moved, without a question, from being a spud to a chip economy. From exports, from jobs, from people what they're learning in college, and there's a graph there that will demonstrate that. And I'm not that old. I may look that old, and my kids certainly think I'm billions of years old. But the day that Ireland entered into the EU, which is only 50 years ago, I think, 52% of our exports was live cattle. Live cattle, probably to Britain. So in 50 years, we now have today 162 billion euros worth of exports of data and ICT-related services. 162 billion. 158 billion, I think it is, for pharmaceuticals. So data in the centres, data in the jobs, are just another one of our woven fabric of foreign direct investment. That's it. And therefore, when we look at data and the importance of it, that's when we start to look at Ireland actually is a remote location. Valentia is a remote location of Ireland. So there's learnings there. And technology has never been the inhibitor. We spoke earlier. Very rarely in any seismic change is technology the inhibitor. That cable that you see pieces of it down there was already in place because there was one between Holyhead and Dublin. So the technology was there. What it needed was the bravery, the creativity, and the relentlessness, or stupidity, of somebody to go and pull the cable. So where we are now in Ireland, data is, without question, our biggest export. I think it's second. You probably have the numbers, Mark. I think pharmaceutical is just behind it. But data and related services is our biggest. And there are many, many people now all over Ireland working for those said companies and Irish companies because cultures have changed within the organisations to allow them. It's interesting where we are.
That's great. Thanks, Gary. That was a great response. I think woven into the fabric of your comments about data is also the people. And I think that's a big part of your story, so that is a great segue to Norma here, and you've already been, I think, quite rightly introduced by Leonard in terms of your own community activism and your own resilience and your own relentlessness in terms of what you've been working for and about here in Valentia. So just tell us a bit about that process, but also perhaps pick up on this, not only Ireland, the remote, but here in Valentia as a remote, and what does that mean for the conversation we're having here about regional communities and about development, and about the opportunities that are there now, and what has COVID in the mix of all of that done to our thinking. So over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. The notion of remoteness and peripherality, I've actually changed my mind a good bit about this over the last while, because I'm not that much younger than June. There's only a little bit between us. But again, very fortunate. I wouldn't have gone to school in Carsveen. I went to school in Waterville. Extremely fortunate with the level of education we were able to receive here in Southwest Kerry. I went to a tiny school. There were 15 people in my class here. 15. And if you wanted to do a higher level in anything, you had the opportunity to do it. There was no, we were encouraged, supported, and the desire to attend third level. It wasn't a given, as in it wasn't as if we had loads of people to point to in the past, but our teachers encouraged us to do it. So, and once you had people at home who gave it who allowed it to be an opportunity, then you had that opportunity. So I was lucky enough to appreciate that at the time. It's not just now looking back that I appreciate it. I was fortunate enough to realise you're an extremely lucky young person to be where you are and to be receiving the chances that you're receiving. And I was also, I suppose, like that, just this area, the sport, the culture, the people, how we intermingle. I think if again, I was fortunate that I didn't have to go away to appreciate that. I realised that partly, I think, because we were a tourist economy as well. And you would ask yourself, well, why do so many people come here? And if you ask yourself these questions, you realise, well, yeah, they're not wrong. There's reasons they come and want to meet us and visit the area and see what's to be seen here. And you gain, I feel like, I suppose, a respect and understanding and appreciation for what we have as well. But throughout all of that, we were always conscious of the fact that it would take you an awful long time to go anywhere to do normal business. So you'd have to go to Tralee or Killarney, you might have to go to Dublin or to Cork, so travel. And there was a sense of remoteness. But I've come to the realisation that in real terms, when you put it down to miles and kilometres and you compare us to Canada and the vastness of Canada, you look at the Great Plains in America, you look at the outback in Australia, we're not really remote. At all. It's about having good systems in place and good transportation systems, and like as a public representative, part of my duty and responsibility is to fight for those systems and to make sure that they're put in place. And COVID has been, it's accelerated what we were trying to achieve in terms of DigiHubs. It brought a lot of companies to the realisation that, yeah, we can actually trust our workers to be at home and working. And even if it's going to be flexible, once it's productive, how they do it is fine. And to facilitate that, so the DigiHub that's going to be here, the DigiHub we're going to build in Ballinskelligs. We sanctioned over 2 million to have a DigiHub to be built there in the middle of the Gaeltacht. These are very important things, but they bring with them challenges because timing is important. And in order for us to be able to harness that energy and that desire to come home and work from here at the really good job that your great education got you, and to bring that spending power back to South Kerry, all of which is very important to us, and to bring those young children back here to be reared in the local traditions and heritage, accommodation and being able to source good accommodation is one of our big obstacles at the moment. So in order to ride that wave and capitalise on things, we have to accelerate other elements to make that happen locally as well. And those are our challenges. And we also have to realise that, yes, we have a loft here and there are people from the place who want to come back and work here and people not from the place who've discovered it who want to live here and work from here. But if we don't get those other elements right, then Berlin is going to become attractive to work from home and live in Berlin at that great job. So, we can't be complacent about this and we can't be over-sentimentalising it either. We have to get the other elements right. So there is a job of work to be done, okay? Thank you.
Thanks, Norma. And I think that's a perfect lead-in to where we wanted to go next, and that's really to hear what does this mean, this exact theme around the work that needs to be done for you in South Kerry, and I think your plans to try to grow that that investment that's already here, and what are some of the challenges and opportunities that are there. And I think particularly we talk a lot about talent, and we know talent in any place is hard to come by. Is finding talent an issue for you, and what's going on in your thought process in terms of what you need to do to help grow that business here in South Kerry?
Yeah, I mean, there's an international war on talent. Our business, we are looking to play and win and compete in a global industry. And to do that, you have to have people. And it always comes down to people. People make things happen, no matter what. I often think of our name, we take our name, Skellig 618, from the 618 steps that go to the monastery on the top of Skellig. And you often think about the type of people that said, I have a great idea, lads, right? We're going to build a monastery 12 kilometres out in the Atlantic with no running water, no earth, and it's going to be the 6th century, and it'll be brilliant. And guess what? They'll all be talking about us 1,500 years later, right? So we keep that's the why close by, when we're building the business. And the pieces to get there, it's about people. And I was alluding that in my opening remarks, is that places like this create a resilience and a diversity of skills that I wish my Dublin city-based children can tap into. They can plug into, because I think they're all the better for it. So for us here, finding excellence has not been a problem. Finding the person that matches the job description of what you want them to do, huge problem. But when you start with the person and put the scaffolding around them to be able to move forward, that hasn't been a problem for us. But the remote working is hugely important. I mean, it goes to the heart of any business, having the confidence to be able to convince their investors, who are very traditional investors, that we can do this here and we can win here. Being in the spirits business helps, because people think of rural Scotland, they think of rural Kentucky, they think of, that helps a little bit. But the skills you needed 100 years ago to be a player in the global spirits business was you needed to be good with pipes, you needed to get good whiskey out of grain. The skills you need now to be able to compete are digital marketing. You need those as well, of course. So always begins with people. I have to say here, we haven't had a problem with finding excellent people. I'm going to tell the story very briefly of our visitor experience manager, who was our first employee. She said to me, what will I be doing? I said, I haven't a clue, but we'll figure it out. And last week, she was in London collecting a prize at the Spirits Oscars for the best international tour. And her background was 20 years managing her own creche. So I would say to industry, and I would say particularly to industry who have now gotten used to having everything on an SOP, and you stay in your own lane, and whatever you do, don't get out of the lane, and everything is measured. If you really want to expand out of the thinking and needing innovation and diversity of thought, then go where the people are that can give you that, and where this place fosters that kind of thinking. So beyond our own business, certainly back to the monks and that sense of pure bonkers. Someone had to, the story of Valentia and Heart's Content, I mean, they weren't on Zoom calls convincing each other this was a good idea, right? So, think about it. How did they communicate it? How did they convince the people on the other side of the Atlantic with the 2-week delay on every comment and letter? So that vision and that, things have to be hard won. But as a place, and the technology is here, when you move up to the kind of high level wicked problems we now are faced with, places like this everywhere in the world just creates people that have to solve problems all the time. So yeah, it's here. There's no problem with us finding it here.
That's a very optimistic picture that you've painted, so I think that augurs really well. Nonetheless, I'm sure we would all want to hear some recommendations from somebody who spends their time thinking about digital assets, including from the point of view of skills development. So what kind of recommendations might you have for here, for the community, for Valentia, for other communities that might be defined, rightly or wrongly, as remote communities, in terms of what kind of capacities they're building here?
It was really interesting to hear the why, understanding the why. But I think COVID had so many negatives, hasn't it? But one of the things that it busted was myths about employees, geographic, where they have to be. Overnight, companies were forced to accept if they wanted to stay in business, we're going to have to be blended in the future. But what that did, and it was 2 years, it wasn't a week, it wasn't a month, it was 2 years, behaviors were created. Expectations are created. And there's 3 aspects to talent, isn't there? There's creation, retention, and attraction. So, you know, creation is longer. And unfortunately, the geography of here is not on your side for terms of universities. More than likely, the kids are moving somewhere else to be educated, right? Second, third level. No, but if I want, you know, is it fair? Yeah. Not too dissimilar to the United States. There are better universities at certain different disciplines. So that's a problem because the kids get a taste, don't they? And they often then find it hard to come back. That's one of the challenges. However, there are so many different and new sectors of returning workers that are starting now to be, oh, no, I don't want to move to Dublin to work. I have 3 kids, or I'm this, that, and the other. Now the companies have changed. Now it's accepted, because I think you used the word war on talent. The talent have all the aces now. The talent have all the aces now. My 19-year-old daughter knows exactly where she wants to be because of the thing we've all built, the internet, full of all that data. So it's a totally different world, and COVID was just such a hammer down that industries like retail, like finance, like all these, oh, we could never do that. We're not a .com company. We're not a software company. We're a bottle distiller or a drinks manufacturer. But guess what? You're going to have to. And now they found it actually works. In terms of technology, you're 100%. The basics, and this is going to be strange to some. Remember the 3-4 industrial revolutions I discussed? Broadband access is actually in the previous industrial revolution. Actually, that's the irony of what we're talking about. That's how fast things. We have now, if you don't have 100 megabits plus to your house right now, on that equation, you're in a different industrial revolution. The normal access for the 4th industrial revolution, doing terabits, is actually where you've got at least between 300 and 500 megabits to your house. So these, but they matter. Somebody mentioned, Eddie, I think you mentioned about the video quality. You know, video quality, the tools are there. It's only the pipe into your house, the pipe upstairs. So that has to fundamentally be there. Because if I'm a digital company and I want to have remote workers and I want to have people with options that would like to work for me, I'm Amazon, Google, Microsoft, I'm a pharmaceutical company, whatever it might be, and I'm open now, which they are, for talent to be anywhere. God will take it. You got to have the basics. It's like the foundations of this building. It would have fallen into the sea if it hadn't been concrete. They're just the 101. I mean, broadband access is just 101 stuff, period. But I think somewhere like a digital hub traditionally used to be places for startups and changing of minds and all that. I actually see them quite differently. I see them as a place where people who work for companies that are headquarters in London or Dublin or Galway or something like that are actually using space, like hot desking, you know? Because what we missed most, somebody said it earlier, really, even people who are introverted, was the water cooler bullshit. You know, with this COVID thing. There was very little banter, wasn't there? There was very little, oh, what's going on in Coronation Street and what's going on and all the other stuff and kids and Gaelic and stuff. So actually digital hubs, they have a bad rep because they used to be these digital incubation would bring the smartest minds. Actually, they should just be collaborative workspaces. That's what we should call them, collaborative workspaces. change the message. Because when you say digital, half of this room just turns off. When you talk about painting, the other half, and creativity. So I think words are changing. But if you ask me a direct question, just broadband is like cement. I don't know where you are in the national broadband rollout. I think you had the CEO for here talking last year, hadn't you?
My broadband in Carceline works an awful lot better than Rathmines. So it's
Yeah, but you know Rathmines.
yeah. But I guess, I think that's an important point because the perception is out there. I think that's an important point you raise, even if it's kind of accidental at the end of it. The perception is out there that remoteness means you don't have broadband, that remoteness means you don't have technology, that remoteness it doesn't mean that at all. It just means geography. And I think to the point that Norma made, Jesus, you're a tiny place altogether, really. And what I really appreciate about Zoom, and I was saying this earlier in my legal profession, I was remote working for 15 years when it used to be called lying, okay? And I lied all the time to people. Where I was the lie I used to that was, sorry, I should clarify, that was the only lie I used to tell. So I used to, where are you? Oh, I just can't make that meeting at the moment. I was here with my kids in the summertime. People couldn't accept that you could actually bring your brain outside the canals of Dublin, not a mind down the N7, So I think, that perception of remoteness we need to change the conversation on that. And there's just one thing that we find we talk a lot about here. There's an Irish word, muineen, okay? It's spelled M-U-I-N, I-F-A-N. And it kind of sort of means a calm sense of just self-assuredness. I know my position in the world, it'll be grand, good things will happen. And I think rural Ireland, what COVID has done to places outside of what would have been perceived as I live 5 kilometres from the Docklands in Dublin, right, where people would have perceived that's where the big decisions were happening. 90% of the people there are working to SOPs. There's no decisions happening there. They're working to SOPs where decisions are made outside of there. So what COVID did, I think, as well, is combined with the technology, combined with the I don't have to be there and it's okay to let people go, but also it broke some of the mythology about it as well. So here today, we're talking about things that are, really 33,000 feet, where we had really important geopolitical conversations. Ultimately, and we're talking about how do we keep our young people in schools here at the next part of the conversation. But ultimately, it always comes down to people. So where it's attractive for people, they'll go.
Thanks for that. And I think what underlines all of this in this competition or war for the talent is, what does the talent want? And I think that's where the talent is starting to tell us. But I think the conversation is evolving around it too, because not everybody necessarily wants to stay at home. So where does that social interaction play out? And is that conversation around the water cooler important when your colleagues working in the same industry or the same efforts versus those who might be, individually attached to different companies? So I would suspect this conversation is going to continue to evolve over time, and maybe we don't quite have the answers, but we do know it starts with people, and we do know we need the basics, including to have that collaboration. And we're hoping a lot of collaboration is going to come now, even more between Canada and between Heart's Content and between government partners and community leaders around what we're going to build next. So I'm going to leave the last words on sort of what we're all here for in terms of celebrating our location to Norma, and just to tell us a bit more. You've been such a leader around the UNESCO process. What are your hopes for this project? What do you see for projects like it? In terms of what they might mean here for Valentia, for the region, for Kerry, for South Kerry. Thanks.
Thank you. It's very rarely I get the last word on anything, so I'm going to make the most of this. Thank you very much. Look, from day one, and I have to say, God rest him, Anthony O'Connell. Anthony was brilliant, because Anthony would chase you up, and he'd ring you up if he knew there was a motion on this project coming up in the council. You'd get a call from Anthony the night before. You'd get a text during the council meeting, and you'd have to report back to him after the meeting. So it wasn't by accident that he generated all that great momentum. Quite simply, I believe in this project. I believe we have an obligation to honour that extraordinary creativity, resilience and talent that brought it to fruition in the first place. I think there are very practical reasons why we should support it, but I also think there's, there are bigger reasons why we should support it. The practical reasons are because we do live in a very competitive world, and to have 2 UNESCO World Heritage Sites of very different types side by side will give us such an extraordinary advantage to that travelling community that wants to go and experience something incredible and special and unique. And you'll be attracting to very different markets. And these are people who, if you like, it's quality tourism. It's the type of tourism, it's not fast, it's not conveyor belt stuff, it's tourists who want to come and spend time. And those types of tourists, when they spend time, they return. And they're wonderful ambassadors, each and every one of them themselves, and when they go home or when they go anywhere else, because they'll communicate what they experienced. And that's sustainable. That type of tourism is sustainable. And everything that we do in this day and age, we do have to factor in the notion of, not a notion, the reality of working towards sustainability. So I believe in the project for that reason. I also believe in this project because as a teacher, and by the way, I can't say I've retired, I've resigned my position because I've gone full-time over to the dark side of politics, yes, and I'm one of those who's not a bad politician, right? I come from community activism, but as a teacher, I'm always very conscious of how our young people see themselves and see where they're from. And I want our young people to realise that the world that they are part of, that their parents are part of, is a world that created something so extraordinary and significant. I want them to be inspired by this. And they won't be if they're not aware of it. So I think this whole project is re-educating all of us and all future generations as to what was achieved here. And confidence is an extraordinarily important thing to give to anybody. And it doesn't diminish when you give it to them. It develops, it grows, it expands. And the more confident young people we have about who they are themselves and where they come from, the more capable they become, the more of a sense of belonging they have and a sense of pride they have in the place. And good luck to them if they go travelling. I wouldn't stop anybody travelling. And we were both J1, alumni. I spent a wonderful summer as a camp counsellor in Poughkeepsie in upstate New York. And you triggered a memory because I had to rush to get a plane home because I was getting to see the end of a famine. It was a famine because it was 11 years since Kerry had won an All-Ireland in 1997, and we've had a mini famine since. So I'm hoping now on Sunday that there'll be a circularity to that memory that you triggered. But they're the reasons that I believe in this project. I think from a practical point of view, it can bring great opportunities, but from that sense of belonging that we convince and remind our young people. And by the way, they don't have to be people that have been here for generations. Anybody who lives long-term in this community is a South Kerry person as far as I'm concerned. They're all part of that story. We're by the sea. We've welcomed people, from ships for years. Some of them might have thought they were invading Malair. They were brought into the fold in many different ways themselves, and they just become part of our story. And that's what we want. We want a sustainable future for our community and for our young people. And I believe this is one of the ways that we can do that. So, gur maith agad.
Well, let me say gur maith to you and to all of the panelists. Sure, absolutely. Yeah. Why don't we do that? We'll see who wants to have a chance here to have a question to any of the panelists. Please. Now you get to come and take the mic. We have one mic, right?
The mic, I think when Eddie started, he talked about a world of economics and how that's changed the world. And as I listened to him, he talked about another model, which was a different set of values, perhaps, for society. I might have paraphrased that wrongly, but from my point of view. And I was sitting last week in New York with UCC alumnus, and some of those alumni only graduated last year, and someone graduated 20 years ago. And I saw a huge chasm. I saw an expression of young people who are very different. I have a daughter myself who's just graduated, who don't know this world actually, and where technology is very destructive to them, and has changed their values and has changed their self-worth. And I'm wondering what we, all of us, educators and everybody in society do. June, I know you have someone at the same age, so yeah. I'm just wondering on your perception. I was watching the reaction of our alumni in both Boston and New York actually last week to see that response, and it just reinforced for me in the university where students' values are very different. They don't want to work with the big fours and big fives. They want to work in remote areas. They want to the quality of life. And maybe what you're epitomising, June, is actually a reference to quality of life. So just throwing that into the mix, the next generation, I suppose, that are just leaving or just in school today. Thank you.
Thank you. And as a very proud UCC alumna, I'm going to answer that from my president. I have 4 teenagers. And it's a very interesting world they find themselves in, and then we have, maybe people in their 20s that are working on the team with us. I think, yes, for sure, data is really important, but I think Ambassador, our American friend, touched on it when she spoke about, needing to connect, and there's that human element. I think there has to be a hybrid, John. I think what people want is they want to belong. They want to feel like they want to belong somewhere. And it's up to us, and Norma touched on it, to make places not make them attractive, talk from the rooftops about what is already attractive here, because we have what they want at different points in your life. Listen, bright lights, big city, we're all the same at a certain age, but there comes a point where you want something else, and I think, Ambassador Smythe, you touched on it as well. It's what the talent wants. The talent these days, younger, they know what they want. I see it in my son, and I think, Gary, your daughter is the same age. They have a very different perception of where they need to go, and being shoehorned into adhering to SOPs just because they're working in the Docklands in Dublin isn't cool to them anymore, as it may have been 20 years ago. So there's a challenge there that is probably being driven by the fact that business and government and policymakers need talent to solve the massive wicked problems we find ourselves in, geopolitically, climate-wise, and if we're to tap into those, we can't shoehorn our young people anymore into where it might have been convenient for us to send them. So hopefully conversations like this will accelerate in different corners, but to your point, John, the young people themselves are accelerating them themselves, and it was very interesting to hear that feedback.
It's really interesting when I hear that, and I'm sure I have a 19-year-old and a 13-year-old, so I don't need to go and listen to thought leaders about their mindset and the change. I just talk to them, and that gives you enough ammunition. But the one thing that is very clear is that the speed by which we are getting information and they're making decisions has never been faster, but the fundamental effect is the same as my mother when she was asked by her grandmother about television. Television had the similar effect to changing. Irish kids started speaking with American accents, right? Still do. They lisp up in the top, and you go down in Boston, right? But it's tools that, to your exact point, talking to the kids, understanding, because my mother's generation would have more been not lean into the problem. They'd run away and ignore it. It's not going to stop. It's not going to stop. The tools that are conditioning and pointing exactly as Eddie said to get the dopamine running in the brains, that doesn't happen by chance. The ads, the TikTok videos, all that type of stuff. So the best thing to do, and change has effects on everybody. You can either embrace it, punch it, or run away from it. You have no choice but to embrace it. And educators are doing that more than anybody. You spend all day and every day with them. Just talking about one thing about what you're saying, or maybe it was yourself, about here, why this is important. I was brought up, again, I refer back to my mother, and her favourite thing was, us Irish. They say about the Irish and the Dutch. If the Dutch were in Ireland, they'd feed the world. If we were in Netherlands, we'd all drown. So we had this mindset that we weren't engineers, we weren't innovators, we were farmers. Do you get the context of the drowning thing? So we got to change that by actually demonstrating that 150 years here, and also the other one that came out when our discussion was, is it Newgrange, the tomb, is 3,000 years before the pyramids? So there was a lot of innovation. And no, we go back and we learn about Daniel O'Donnell, or Connell, in history. Not O'Donnell. That's a different show. That's a different show.
Thanks. That was great. Go ahead. Thanks.
Being a bit cheeky, if I'm questioning, is there any such thing as globalization? Is it really nationalism trying to do a little bit of trade with other countries? Because if you think the theme of everything that went here, they're saying how good we are, how good Ireland is, how good Kerry is normally, you know, and Valentia, whatever, it doesn't matter. So just trying it open to people. Is there any such thing as globalization at all?
I'll see who wants to go with that, but I think, you know, the last question is a good lead on from that, because I think the beginning words of your question were about values, and you referred to this conversation about equality, which I heard a lot about, that theme of equality in your discussion, and the theme around democracy and the global value of that. But I'm going to maybe see who wants to take on that.
We haven't mentioned it. I was surprised that we didn't. But Brexit and Trump didn't help.
Just for the
Yes. Huh? No, but the psychology of our kids.
Do we want to bring Eddie? Like we could
Yeah,
bring.
but Brexit and Trump didn't help this whole idea of protectionism, right? Our kids, my kids, don't see anybody different. They're just a face on a Zoom screen. They really don't. So, to your point, we have nationalities, but I don't think my kids see as much the nationality thing. They're colleagues. They're Europeans. I'm a global citizen. That's what I tell my kids. What's that?
Somehow I end up holding the mic and everyone's looking at me. So, yeah. I think it's a very interesting question, because it kind of goes back to the human nature thing. I'm not qualified to talk about the geopolitical level, but I am qualified to talk as a person, right? We all want to belong, and we all want to find people that we feel we belong to. I think the difference now is, because we know so much more about the world, the people that I feel I belong to are just as likely to be living in Pakistan as they are to be living in Falmore, you know, because I know more about them, and it's that sense of, well, that woman is like me. And the difference is, I've had the chance of the education, I've had the chance of not having to worry about how to feed myself today or tomorrow, I've had the chance of the commercial opportunities that went with it, but actually she's not that different from me. And the fact that you know about it. So I don't know if that answers, it certainly doesn't answer it on an academic level, but I think it answers it on a human level. And the problems that we're facing today as a world, they are massive, wicked problems that don't know boundaries. It's rising sea levels. It's, you know, how do we stop war? These are huge problems. And so therefore, you know, the human element of where we belong to, I think is the difference now, is that we know, and our children know way more about who else is out there that's like us. And if they're not like us now, they were like my great-great-grandmother, curing and culling and cutting mackerel behind in Port McGee. And the only difference between us is 150 years of time.
It's a great question, because there are over 1.2 billion TikTokians who identify more with TikTok personality and platform than they do about Valentia, Kerry, or Ireland.
Norma?
My 13-year-old definitely. Her peers, her national peers are TikTokers. Everywhere.
I just want to say, John, by the way, was one of my teachers, so you get an idea of how good an education we had. And we were challenged, you know. It was
However many years from now, I'm going to ask you this question.
the honours question to haunt me. In terms, like, it is a brilliant question, and I might wander a little bit here, because I genuinely want to answer it, because I think it's linked to one of the things that Eddie said when Eddie's talking about when you measure success, and it can't just be GDP, it has to be social protection and all the rest of it, and I'm completely 100% for that. If we allow just corporate entities on their own to dictate, we're going to have whole swathes of very dissatisfied people who could be citizens in a functioning state, okay? And that's a very dangerous situation. I think we do have that in a lot of places. and a very simple example is the example of the last 2 days here in Ireland with AIB, who announced that they were going to make 70 branches cashless. And I was really angry, I have to say now. And it actually takes an awful lot to get me to lose my temper. But I am Seamus Moriarty's daughter, and I do lose my temper every now and again. And I got extremely angry with this decision, as did others. And they hauled back on it today, because people stood up and said, no, you don't. You do not treat us like that. We were there when you were on the brink of oblivion, and we carried the can to bail you out. And we want to conduct our business where we live in a fully functioning banking system with access to cash and so on. So I think that type of standing up to the worst elements potentially of extreme corporate outlooks and globalization, the bottom line, and it has to be coming back to what kind of society we live in. And I think we need to do an awful lot more of that, because governments are guilty of this as well. In a lot of our services, in a lot of our, we'll say, delivery service, like the Citizens Information Service, for example, it's increasingly difficult to walk into the office without an appointment. And it's increasingly difficult to be able to get an appointment. That's not conducive to good society. So, yes, you can do things online, but there is no substitute for in-person. And we have to fight for, ensuring that we do that. And good countries, good functioning societies are within a state, but the state has to listen to its people, and you have to have that democratization. You absolutely do. So there's an awful lot that we need to do. And again, you're getting the full star here now. You're maybe be very proud, because what you said about the media was so important. I think Kerry is an aberration in that, because we're exceptionally well served by Kerry Radio, I have to say. We're genuinely well served here in the county, and Radio na Gaeltachta. We really do have access to good media that does explore, that does question, that does test people. But the media is enormously important, because when media became entertainment, we went into a very dangerous place worldwide. Media shouldn't be entertainment. Media should be about, what journalism should be about, the watchdog, the questioning, the informing, the providing the citizen with the opportunity to ask the question. And we have to make sure and fight for that. So I think, growing up I would have actually called myself a nationalist, but I'm not a nationalist in that, that narrow way. I love being Irish. I love being from Kerry. I was delighted that we beat the All Blacks, in Wellington last week, and I thought it was wonderful. I love sport, and all of these things that mark you out is different, but that doesn't mean you have to diminish other nations or other people. So that, globalization does not mean, it's not the opposite of a negative nationalism. So these are complex things. Thanks, John, for making me mithered now, as you always did. But anyway, that's my contribution.
Don't you love, I think, as Ambassador Cronin has said, it comes back to sports a lot here, doesn't it? And I think that is part of the answer around the question. And I think, global citizens is not globalization. But I think your conversation it was a lot about nationalism and the risks of nationalism. And that's what we're seeing in too many parts of the world. So I think we're setting up Leonard well for themes for next year, about what does globalization mean, and what are the impacts of globalization. And I think there's a lot of positive impacts of globalization. And coming back to the theme of media, Professor Chris Morash, a Canadian working at TCD, talked about the impact of this cable and what that meant for democratizing access to media and to information, that all of a sudden the whole world could have the same information at the same time. And so it's done a lot of good. And I think there's a lot of challenges to where we are, as you so well laid out. So I won't try to summarize, not to worry about that, but I will just pick up on a couple of quick things about really, I think, changing the conversation came up a lot. Talent, and thinking about what do talent want, including whether those are coming from a talent pool of Valentia, of South Kerry, Kerry, Ireland, Canada, the US, or anywhere else globally. But then also taking what we have, and then what else do we need to accelerate? And I think the whole themes that we've heard around remaining, relentless, the impact of people not being complacent, regardless of where you are, play and win and compete, And I think people have to think hard about that, but also the values that came up in the questions and in some of the keynote addresses today about sustainability and what does it take to keep democratic processes and then be inspired. And I think we're all here to be inspired, and I think we continue to be inspired by what happened here so long ago. And I have no doubt what's going to happen in this community in the years to come.